To introduce myself, my name is Lauren Hagee. I am the program administrator on this project. We're going to talk a little bit about the Line Canal Trail project in Southeast Denver and the overall process here. So I have my screen shared. Let's see. Just a reminder, if you want captions, to turn those on with the closed caption button through Zoom. Feel free to enter questions in the chat. I may not be able to see them as easily while I'm presenting, but when we get to the Q&A portion, I will definitely address everything that you guys have entered in the chat there. Okay, so just a quick agenda, what we're getting into today. First, a quick overview of the public art program and our selection process. We'll talk a little more in detail about the materials that you'll need to submit through CAFE, then dive into the Line Canal Trail project specifically, and then take questions on that process. And then for those that are new to the entry process, I'll go through call for entry tutorial. So first, a quick breakdown of the public art program here in Denver. It was first established by Mayor Federico Peña in 1988 and was adopted as an ordinance in 1991. We've had this program for a while. We have more than 400 pieces installed, which is amazing. There's some similar programs across the nation. And in basically any capital improvement project that the city undertakes that has a budget of over $1 million, 1% of that overall budget is set aside for public art. So in this case, for the Line Canal, this public art project is being funded by a capital improvement project to build a pedestrian underpass, which I'll share a little bit more about later. So public art sounds like most of you are familiar, but just a quick run through, have very particular goals, different than maybe other settings. For public art, we're really looking for artwork that is site specific and unique, that is speaking to that location and its users, perhaps is referencing history or cultural elements of the place. Artwork that really enhances the experience of, visiting that space. Another major tenet that's important with our public art program is that the selection is through an open and transparent process. So I'll talk a little bit more about what our public selection, our art selection committee looks like, kind of who is involved and what that process entails. So that makes sure that our community members, really have an opportunity to have an impact on their environment and have a say in the art that represents their neighborhood. So if you're new to public art, you might be wondering sort of what is and what isn't. It's never an easy question to answer with art, but for public art, some general guidelines to think about are, we're not looking at mass-produced objects like bike racks or benches, basically, anything that can be purchased from the store or maybe a pre-existing work of art that you're looking to sell. This is a commission to create a new public artwork that speaks to that space like we were just speaking of. And then generally landscaping, things like that don't tend to be public art. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rules like land art, environmental art, but that's just sort of some basics. Like for this image here, that's an example of, the Tremont sign is advertising wayfinding, so that wouldn't be considered public art. But there is a public artwork attached to it, that little camera. So that's sort of an interesting combination of the two. So on the flip side, there's a long list of what we do consider public art. And of course, it's always expanding. There's some major forms that we tend to see in the public art world. Of course, sculpture, that's going to be a big one, three-dimensional artwork. Lots of painting as well, murals, both interior, exterior, or framed artworks. Of course, certain calls make space for printmaking, drawing, other two-dimensional mediums. You'll see a lot of mosaics, outdoor artworks, but they can really, it can really cover, the whole range of artistic mediums. It's just about finding the location, the call that maybe fits that artwork in the best environment. So as mentioned earlier, Denver Public Art goes through a public selection process, which is monitored to ensure fair and equitable process and encourages a wide, diverse range of panelists. You may know this, but it's important to always note that myself or any of the public art staff in general do not get a vote in what artwork is chosen for this commission. So my role is to facilitate the process and provide support to the panelists and the artists along the way. The panel consists of members who live and work in the community. We also have an artist representative and an arts professional. We always have a civic leader, usually someone from the council office, and also members of our public art committee and commissioners from the Denver Commission on Cultural Affairs. This by ordinance is the composition that is followed for every project, although the exact number of people may vary. For the Line Trail panel, we have 9 voting members and 2 non-voting technical advisors. Here's just a breakdown of the selection process. I think it's always helpful to kind of see everything that goes into it. It's a pretty long and lengthy process. We're only at stage 2. So I've met with the panel. We've determined, what are our goals and the things that we may want to see, and then put the call out to artists. We're in that phase right now. I'll remind everyone of this a few times, but at this phase for RFQ, it's a request for qualifications. So we're not looking for specific proposals of what project you might do. Instead, at this stage, we're really looking at images of your previous work to kind of get a sense of who we want to then invite to do a proposal. So that's the next step after the panel reviews all the applications. We narrow it down to about 3 to 5 finalists. Then those finalists will receive more information on the project, have an opportunity to meet with the community members and more technical experts, and have usually about 1 to 2 months to create a proposal, which there is an honorarium for. Those proposals are then presented back to the selection panel, who then votes as a group to decide of who to award the commission. And then finally, of course, it has to be approved by the Public Art Committee, the Commission on Cultural Affairs, and the Mayor's Office. Okay, here's just another visual that kind of shows the process. I always think it shows it a little easier. So we're right there where that yellow square is, where the call is opening. And then we'll move through cafe scoring after you guys all apply. That's when the panelists will do their individual review. So a long process, but I think a pretty interesting one. Okay, let's see. So moving through this, materials to submit. We'll run through the required materials that are needed for this particular request for qualifications. Again, everything is outlined in detail in the RFQ itself, which is listed on call for entry as well as the Denver Public Art website. I can pull it up towards the end of the presentation. So no need to memorize all of this, but it'll be good to talk through things in a little more detail and take questions on what they might mean. Okay, so RFQ requirements, again, we're only looking for these elements. Some people still want to submit a proposal. I don't recommend that. We're just looking for images of your work. That can be displayed in 4 to 6 digital images of the past work. You can enter 1 video piece as well, your resume, and then a statement of interest no longer than 2,000 characters. We'll go through the statement of interest in more detail. I want to emphasize that this is a really important part of the process where you can speak to the panel, you can speak to the goals listed in the RFQ, and you can really indicate a strong interest in that project or that community. I think it's particularly important if you're an artist who has not done a public art project before, who might be a little more emerging, or maybe is interested in, maybe you're a muralist, but you're applying for your first 3-dimensional like sculptural piece. I would again, recommend really paying attention to that statement of interest as a way that you can speak a little bit more to your experience or your interest in, why you want to do this and how you might achieve it. And we'll talk more about that. So images, always important to emphasize how critical they are. While the panelists will look through your entire application, the first impression is always the images. So you want to make sure that they're high quality images and that they really showcase your work. One little note, if you are submitting video clips, do not put those as your very first image in your portfolio in Cafe because it just tends to show up as an empty white box when you look at it. It's just kind of a weird thing. So I always recommend putting, if you have a video, put that towards the end of your portfolio. Uh, did someone have a question? No. Okay. So consider the quality of the images. Cafe will walk you through their exact requirements. Um, they need to be a minimum of 1200 pixels, and Cafe only allows JPEG uploads. And again, they do not have to be images of previous public artwork. So if you're an artist, but you haven't done public artwork, you can still, apply to an RFQ with images of your artwork, even if they weren't put out there in the public art realm. We really, really encourage first-time artists to apply. We want to support emerging artists. I know it's always a little intimidating if you haven't done it before, but that's something just to keep in mind. Here's two images just for example. They're both high quality images, but one is doing a much better job of showcasing the art to the panelists. The one on the left, it's a nice image, but we can't really see that artwork up close. We can tell that a participant is interacting, but not really exactly how. So a more close-up image would have, better highlighted what that interactivity is. Whereas the one on the right, is a high detail image that includes the full scale of the mural itself, has great lighting, and gives us a good sense of the color palette. One other thing, often artists will work as a collaborative team, or if you're a newer artist, you might have apprenticed under a different public artist. You can include those images, but please, you'll have an opportunity in your image upload to add notes. And that's where you would want to disclose that that artwork was made in collaboration with another artist, just so you don't run the risk of the panel misinterpreting that you're claiming the work solely on your own. So the resume section, of course, is pretty self-explanatory. Simply upload a copy of your resume, no more than 2 pages long for an individual artist. If you are someone who's working as a duo or an artist team, submit your resume together with no more than 1 page per team member. And then just little things, follow the naming conventions there that are listed out of last name dot first name. Okay, so again, the statement of interest is required. It's something that each panelist looks at, especially when they're making those hard final calls between artists. 2,000 character maximum. Let's see. Again, it's important to stress how important this can be. Like you said, especially if you're new or if you're switching. Another thing to note, obviously, if you're someone who applies to a lot of calls, we understand that you may be sort of copying and pasting some statement of interest from different calls. It's understandable, but I just want to put it out there. Just, make sure that you're editing and you're reviewing and reviewing. You can't guess how many times we get statement of interest that have a completely different project title. That's a very quick way to sort of show the panel that you're not that interested in their project. Just a little human thing, just make sure you proofread it, make sure that you have all the right details there. Another little note, just technical with Cafe, is it can be a little glitchy sometimes. So if you are copying and pasting your statement of interest from Microsoft Word, it might accidentally copy over some weird hidden characters. So I always recommend before you paste it directly into Cafe, maybe paste it into a neutral program like Notepad and just double check that you're not getting like sort of strange wingding and different characters that you didn't intend. So the point is just review, review, review. So these are the statement of interest questions that are specific to Line Canal Trail. Some of them, if you've applied to different Denver public art projects, might look a little familiar. Sometimes they have very specific questions. Sometimes they're a little more general like this. But, why is the Line Canal Trail project of particular interest to you? So that's where, you can really call attention to, what drew you to either the area or the possibilities of that project. How does your artistic practice align with the project goals? So when you look through that RFQ, there will be listed goals that the panel decided on as a group, things that they're kind of hoping to see out of the final artwork, sort of their wish list, if you will. Think about how the work that you've done or might do kind of ties into some of those goals. Um, how your design approach and experience has been working on public art projects or collaborating with diverse communities and stakeholders. Again, those can be questions that are a little intimidating if you haven't done a public art project before. So that is where I would recommend maybe taking the time to talk about how you would approach it. I think people really understand that you may not have had the opportunity before, but that you still have put some thought into it of, maybe you're going to collaborate with another artist or work with a fabricator to realize your goal. You don't have to have everything figured out, of course, but if you haven't had that experience, just talk about how you might do it or why you're interested in trying it. It's better than not addressing it at all. Okay, so we're going to move into talking a little bit more about the specific project. So this parent project is part of a larger effort to improve travel conditions in and around the Line Canal in Southeast Denver. It's a transportation project. It's funded by by a general bond. The budget for the public artwork is $112,000 would be the full budget to work with. Applications for this project can be submitted until September 1st at 11:59 p.m. And just to note that they must be submitted through the cafe web portal. Sometimes people will try and just email it to us. Unfortunately, we cannot accept them unless they are submitted through cafe. And if you have any technical issues, cafe has a pretty good help desk that can walk you through whatever those issues might be. Okay, so like I mentioned before, our public art projects are funded through the capital improvement projects. This one specifically is the construction of an underpass at Holly Street and Yale Avenue, allowing pedestrians and bicycles to go underneath on a safer mode of transit. It's a very dangerous and high traffic area, so it's part of a larger improvement to sort of ease congestion and help with multimodal transportation. We don't have, this project hasn't started yet, the construction, it's about to. So we don't have, pictures to show you, but this is a very comparable underpass that the city has done at Mississippi and Parker. So it kind of gives you an idea of what that larger construction project is. This location of the underpass right at Holly and Yale is under consideration as a location for the artwork, although it does have a few complications. And as such, we decided to kind of, also highlight some other possibilities nearby that I'll talk about. The complications for doing an artwork at this specific underpass, it's like I said, very high traffic. We don't want to add more distractions to that area. Often artworks, at those high traffic intersections will get, ran into. And can cause a lot of damage. Also, there's just not a lot of land to work with around the underpass. And then other things just to note that, we want to avoid doing artwork inside the underpass or murals on the outside of it because of maintenance issues. They're too hard to maintain. But one possibility could be perhaps, a mosaic or a different invention along the outer wall. One thing to consider if you are a muralist, you can collaborate with a mosaic artist, or there's lots of fabricators that, can translate painted works into other mediums. So just a few notes, not any direction you have to take, but just some things about that particular construction location. So the public art ordinance, you may or may not know, does allow us to look within 1 mile of the capital project location to find the most suitable location for the artwork. So given some of those kind of complications, we wanted to find the most successful, an area that's going to give artists the most opportunities to work with. And so we've highlighted a few other possible locations that are along the Highline Canal and are specifically in Eisenhower and Bible Park, which is desirable just due to, their high traffic areas for, pedestrians and cyclists and people using the park, a little bit safer for the artwork and a little more space to work with. So these are just general inspiration ideas or pictures. They're not exact locations, but they're kind of just giving you a sense of what the environment would be for this future artwork. Um, at this stage, you don't need to know exactly where you might put something. It takes a long time to figure that out. And even after the artist is commissioned, you have, potentially years to work with, technical experts and parks and rec and figure out exactly where it goes. But we're trying to give you the general environment. The panel does note in the RFQ that they are most interested in three-dimensional works. Another thing that I think is interesting from this panel is it was brought up that they're interested in an idea of how could an artwork sort of move you along the trail. Interpret that however you will, but ideas were brought up of, what if it was sort of a repeating thing or, sort of something that kind of carries through. That's just one thing to note out of what, they presented in their goals. Okay, just to zoom out a little bit and kind of reorient us about, what is the general Denver location? As I mentioned, this is University Hills, southeast Denver. You can see it's sort of bounded in that triangular shape, bounded by I-25, Colorado Boulevard, and Hamden. Looking at this map, the red square is that location of the construction. And those blue circles are those other identified areas at Eisenhower and Bible Park. So next, we'll just have a few slides just to dig a little bit into the historical info of University Hills and Highline Canal. Obviously, it's not going to be all inclusive, but the purpose is to really give you a little more context and a little more information about that location that might help inform your statement of interest or just inspire you to do a little more research on the area. Excuse me, Okay, so first and foremost, obviously want to acknowledge that Denver is on the traditional territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho peoples when we're looking at the history of the land. Moving forward, this area, like most of Denver, was rural farmland in Arapaho County up until sort of the World War II era where it experienced a lot of growth. This area had a huge increase in population, 146% increase from 1940 to 1965. So you'll see in this neighborhood a lot of sort of mid-century development. There's still quite a lot of houses that you can see that have that sort of mid-century look. If you grew up in the area, you may have been familiar with the University Hills Shopping Center, which opened in 1953 and was a big sort of feature of the neighborhood. It was burned in the 80s, had significant damage, but reopened. It's no longer there. But from the 1990s to the present, especially with there was new light rail and different construction improvements had a similar boom. The neighborhood has continued to grow. It's one of the many desirable neighborhoods. Of course, hard housing shortage, high cost of living, but it's a desirable neighborhood that just keeps growing and growing. But since this parent project really centers around the Highline Canal, let's spend just a few minutes exploring the trail and its impact on the area's history and modern day usage, because it's a pretty important part of this project. And in the RFQ, the panel does mention that they're interested in artworks that can in some way refer to the history of the land and the canal. So if you're unfamiliar, the Highline Canal is a 71-mile recreational trail now that winds its way through 11 different jurisdictions. So Denver has a section of it, but so do other municipalities. It runs all the way from Waterton Canyon in Douglas County out to sort of Northeast Aurora out by DIA. You may be familiar. If not, I want to call out the Highline Canal Conservancy. They're a nonprofit organization that has really taken on the huge effort of sort of, collaborating across these different municipalities to ensure that the trail is protected and improved and preserved for, decades to come. So check out their website. It gives you a lot more information on the canal as well. So while we know it now as a recreational trail, the origin was, of course, as an irrigation canal, really designed to deliver the water from the foothills of Waterton Canyon all the way out to the farmlands. It's named for the Highline principle, which relies on gravity to direct the flow of water along the highest possible elevation, sort of moving it through with it. That's why there's so many twists and turns sort of along the way. It was constructed between 1879 and 1883, um, all hand dug. It was a pretty amazing feat, and really helped to, move water and develop all of those, different neighborhoods. Unfortunately, when it was built, there were 74 other canals that had senior water rights to the Platte, so it didn't work exactly as they thought, and the water did eventually sort of dry up, which we'll talk about in the next slide. But Denver Water took ownership of the canal in 1924. There's just some nice images from Denver Water. So as the water sort of dried up or other methods of irrigation were preferred, the Highline Canal luckily transformed into a recreational trail, taking advantage of sort of the walkways and trails that have sort of developed alongside the irrigation canal. So in 1970, it officially shifted to be a recreational asset and was designated a National Landmark Trail. It's used very heavily throughout the state, more than 1 million users annually across, different modes of transportation. It's also an important environmental location. It's home to, almost 200 species of birds, 28 mammals, 15 reptiles, and as far as we know, over 23,000 trees. Um, so,
Ooh.
yeah. And these images are provided by History Colorado. So if you're interested, there's also more information about the Highline Canal Trail on their website. Okay, so I've been referring a lot to those goals that the panel outlined in the RFQ. So now's a good time to really read those and think about those. Um, these are goals that were outlined by the panelists, so bear in mind that as they're looking through applications, they might be looking for some evidence of, or even just some potential for these characteristics in sort of your future work. So it's a good opportunity to think about the images you choose and how, if some of them kind of speak to these things, they might be particularly good images to include. And if not, again, that statement of interest can help you sort of emphasize, expand upon some of these keywords or include some of these into your statement. So the first thing that the panel was interested in, and of course, just to say, like, panels come up with a long list of goals. An artwork can't do everything that is outlined, but these are sort of their wish lists and they're things that are important to them. To consider. So the main thing is that it's culturally relevant to the past, present, and future of the physical space. So that's why it's helpful to know a little bit more about the land and the canal itself. Um, the panel was interested in, possibly artworks that have an experiential, interactive, or kinetic aspect. Really, there was a lot of discussion about, this is a trail where people are moving through, people are biking and running. There's a sense of motion. And so if there was an artwork that could potentially tap into that, that could be fun. There is a mood that they're trying to evoke of, happiness, joy, safety, and welcome, interested in colorful artworks. And again, these are things for the proposal, but I just think they're helpful to know going into it. A lot of panelists talked about, being on the trail, being a safe space for them and a place where they can meet their neighbors and travel from neighborhood to neighborhood. So that's sort of the overall feeling that they're looking to sort of tap into with the artwork. A lot of interest in the collaborative spirit of the public art process. So while it's not required, but some public artworks, you can have an opportunity to work with the community, either to gather information or perhaps, in the creation of it, that there's an interest in that. Um, the trail, is used by all different people of all ages and abilities. So there was a real interest in artworks that, would engage a wide spectrum of different needs and abilities. So thinking, visually, thinking through auditory and physical interactions, how they might interact with, a whole spectrum of abilities. And then I already mentioned this, but a real excitement about possibilities of, hey, what if it was a multi-piece thing that repeated, or just something that sort of adds to that encouragement and appeal of moving through the space and being in motion. So a lot to think about. Also listed in the RFQ, and when you're thinking about applying, you're thinking about what's the overall, environment that this art will go in, and what sort of media are they interested in. We already talked a bit about the general location. Um, the big thing I think is just it's going to be outdoors. So obviously, they're looking for an artwork that is made out of a medium and constructed in a way that it is suitable for outdoor display, is durable, and can, withstand the sort of weather extremes that we experience here. Other note, outside of that underpass, there isn't another wall that is suitable for a mural. So that may not be the best opportunity for muralists, but you can always think outside the box or think about, how your practice might evolve into, a different medium. Okay. So where can you find more information on this or other opportunities? Hopefully you all are familiar with the Denver Public Art website. We do have RFQs year round, so keep an eye out for other opportunities as well. You may have seen that we just had a pretty exciting one listed for Red Rocks that is open for the next month. And then if you are someone who works, and maybe mediums that are better suited for interior calls, know that we do have a few library projects coming up that sort of provide that different interior environment if sort of these outdoor ones aren't as exciting to you. Another note, just, after you apply, you might be wondering what happens next. It does take 1 to 2 months after the call closes for our panel to fully review all of those applications. And then it does just take a long time to get our second meeting scheduled. So it can be a while before you hear, whether you are proceeding to the proposal stage or not. If you have questions along the way, you can always feel free to email me. I can tell you kind of where we're at in the process, or, just help you with any questions. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and love to just take some. I'll look at the chat first and see if we have questions there. After that, if people want to just raise their hand, I can go through any questions you have on the RFQ or the project. If they are questions about how to use call for entry, save those because I can do a tutorial of that process after this. So just give me 1 second here. Okay. Great. Okay, so that was a lot of info, but what questions come up? Are there things that let's see in the chat here we have, yeah, okay, our tech issues. Oh, good question, Allison. In terms of that goal of having an artwork that, maybe repeats, the question is, are we supposed to imagine, it repeating across all 71 miles? And no, that would not be the case. We're looking at that pretty specific, the RFQ even sort of calls out the exact kind of mile markers of the trail. And if you pull up the RFQ, There's a link that will even pull up sort of a map that shows you it. We're just working in that 1 mile radius of that Holly and Yale intersection. So repeating on a more small scale, we wouldn't be moving into any of those other municipalities or down the whole length of the trail. That would be quite an undertaking. A good question. That's all we have in the chat. What else comes to mind? Rata?
Yeah, thanks for that info, all the info, Lauren. I really appreciate that. I
Yeah.
was wondering, like, when applicants or when the applications are being reviewed, are the selection committee like reviewing them one by one, or is it like um the selection committee reviewing them all together?
It's a bit of both. First, the panel has their independent review. So they're all added as admins to the cafe website, and they can review they will review every single applicant's portfolio, resume, and statement of interest, and they will assign sort of their ranking. We give them, depending on the amount of people who apply, we tend to give them, you know, 3 to 6 weeks, enough time because everyone's got busy schedules. They're doing this on their free time, but we give them that time to go through every one individually. And then we work basically with a sort of top percentage. We then meet as a panel and have a pretty long meeting where we then go through as a group and look at usually like that top third. We can kind of decide, but we'll go through much more in depth and we do a group voting process where we really talk through the RFQ specifically and, think about how this work, because some people might just like this artwork or that artwork, but really the goal is to focus their voting on how does this relate to the RFQ and how could we see potential, for this work to apply to, this environment or the goals that we put out. So it's a little bit of both. They do an independent review and then we meet as a group to narrow it down from there and get it to 3 to 5 finalists. That is a panel decision as well about whether they want just 3 finalists or whether they want 4 to 5. The negative to having um, more finalists is that honorarium to pay people to make their proposals comes out of that project budget. So the 112,000 that I mentioned, that already, has placeholders for I think 3 finalists. Maybe it has all 5. I have to look at it. But if you add more finalists, that project budget just goes down a tiny bit. But you get more options to choose from. So it's kind of up to the panel. Yeah. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. Sorry, that was more than you asked for. But Sal, let's see. You mentioned the file name for resumes being last name, first initial. If we're applying as a company, would you like the file name to be the company name or aligned with an individual? Hmm, that is a good question. Um, I I think the individual is best, but either way is fine as long as it aligns with the rest of your application. Let me write that question down. I don't know why it's stumping me so much there. I don't think it really matters, but I can get back to you if you want to leave. If you want to shoot me an email when you're applying and just confirm that you're naming it the right way. Um,
Cool.
but yeah,
Yeah, great. I figured it wasn't that big of a deal, but figured
yeah, it's a good, I
just
don't know
check
why
while
it's,
we're here.
yeah, I don't know why it's a bit of a brain stumper for me right now. I'm trying to remember what I've seen in the past, but you can't go wrong with the individual. But yeah, good question. Any other questions from the group on the project specifics or, the selection process? Let's see, Allison. Looking at the photos of location, can the proposed piece, if we were to get the proposal, be in the ground, mounted to the wall, or embedded in concrete? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think the first step would be, working with the different technical experts, our Parks and Rec staff that manage those locations and those trails to get a really good understanding of, once we know what you're proposed, if you were the awarded artist, where would it go? Where would it make sense? Where is it not in the way of irrigation or trees? To find a good location in the ground, mounted to a wall. We don't have a lot of walls to work with in this project unless you were proposing something that was on the outer side of that underpass. That is most likely an option, but that would be a question where we would refer it to the project manager of the underpass just to make sure there isn't. Sometimes when it's on an existing structure, there's warranty or liability concerns, if the artwork interacts with it in that way. And embedded in concrete, that's always an option, but be aware, if you are, say you want to create a concrete bench that then you apply mosaic to, just for example. The cost of making that concrete bench, if it didn't already exist, would come out of the project budget. So think about those things of, how it would be installed and if it is going to require things that aren't already in that location, how to pay for that. So that's a good question.